Welcome to this episode of the Top Left podcast, where we discuss a variety of topics for MSPs, Agile, Lean, projects, leadership, all sorts of things. And today I have James Davis from C-Level Operations in APAC back. Welcome back, James.
Thanks for having me, Wim. It's good to be back and keep the discussions flowing from our series. Been getting a lot of good feedback from it.
Yeah, so we did 5 sessions so far on projects in MSPs, and today we want to talk about how to finish well on a project, so it doesn't flop around in the grave and come back and haunt us. That's the picture I got.
That never happens, does it, Wim? You never have zombie projects just sitting there in your system from a year ago that still haven't been closed off. And scarily enough, when we don't have the billing right, having these zombie projects where we haven't billed anything for it and we're waiting for it to be closed. So unfortunately, it's way more common than it should be. So I think this will be an awesome discussion to have around how do we need to drive to the completion and closure so that we get the right outcomes for the clients, so the project team can move on and focus on the next project and deliver that with quality, and most importantly, so that we can actually get our money. If we're not taking it all up front, nothing's more important than closing it and getting billed, because I don't know about you, Wim, but all the MSPs I've worked with, they're not credit agencies. They don't make their money on holding people's debts. So we've got to do something different. And I think it all stems from, apart from our overall theme of having a clearly defined project process and flow, a lot of it comes down to the psychology of techs around their pursuit of perfection. They will always find something that they can tweak and make better. That's why they're techs. But that's not good on a project. And we're not helped, as like we've discussed in past episodes, around not having a clearly defined scope. We don't actually know what we need to tick off to say it's complete. That just adds to the level of psychology for the guys that, well, we just need to keep making this better. There's an issue that crops up, et cetera, and it just keeps going from there. So what you've got a couple of MSPs. How have you solved this before, from your perspective?
It's the process, right, of the projects, and it starts with how do you scope it out? What does done mean? When are we done? And then there's the client-facing things, but then when you create the project and your PSA, having it all in there, and the team is briefed on it, and you got to consider all parts of the project. There's the finance, there's the documentation, the monitoring. What does it mean to be done? And so that's the scope, but just crossing the T's, dotting the I's. What are the T's? What are the I's that we're worried about? These aren't lingering around. Because a lot of times people say, I'm almost done. There's one more thing that's sitting at that 80%, 90 or 99% mark for months. Or they're like, well, I think the client might come back. I just want to make sure they're completely happy with it. So I'm just going to let it sit there. But you've got to set timelines and ask for the feedback. And at some point it's done. And now it's any other support is just a ticket. You need the process, minimize your work and your process. Don't let it sit there. It's got to be done at some point, but doing it with quality. Like, you don't want it reopened because the work was done sloppily. That's an issue. Like, you don't want the client coming back and saying, you didn't train us, or you didn't give us documentation, or it was buggy, you messed it up. So you got to provide excellence.
And I think what you just said there around that we're waiting for the client to give us feedback. What that's a reflection of more than anything is actually no one's owning the client communication part. We're just focusing on delivering some tech stuff, and then they'll tell us if it's good or not. where we actually need to sit down with them and go, do we have any issues lingering? Is what we've delivered in the project what you've expected? Are we done here? And very few times without a clearly defined process like we were talking about, do people take that initiative to manage the engagement like that. Because we have our project team full of techs. It's very rarely that we've got like a non-technical person that's just thinking in this sort of logical manner around, well, are we done? Yes, well, let's talk to the client. They consider it done, so we can wrap this up and move on with life. So it's very much a process-driven thing, but also then someone's got to own this. And very, very rarely do I see this succeed when we've got our technical lead engineer that's juggling multiple projects. Are they in the headspace to look at it this way as well? Because they're in the deep technical detail most often. They're delivering the work, they're thinking about what they've got to do on the task level, not thinking about it on the flow level. And we've got to look at how to either empower them to look at it that way, or support them with someone else overseeing the flow and holding the team to account that we're actually delivering to the flow that we've agreed to. And I think that's the biggest game changer that I see a lot often. Is just someone needs to be accountable and own it.
Yep.
Yeah. I think also with that is the understanding what we actually need to do from the client sign-off side. Because if we go back to that whole communication, if we're not communicating well through the project, a lot of the time too, we don't actually want to talk to the client about how the project went because we're often embarrassed. It's taken a lot longer than we promised. We've had more issues about it. So we sort of just want it to disappear rather than having that awkward conversation of, actually, it didn't go that great. We've learned all these lessons from this. We've got it working now. And we're going to improve anything that we do in the future from here to actually take that ownership and that maturity and show and value that relationship with the client. We treat projects in a way very transactionally because they are. Like you do a project, they're done, you move on. But we forget that actually we've got this ongoing relationship with the clients, and this is a big impact to the clients. Like we're doing projects all the time, and we've got some dedicated people doing projects. The team is used to doing projects for the clients. They're not used to having technology projects going on. So to them, it's a big deal. And it might only be a 10 grand project, and we might do like 50, 100 grand projects, so it's small to us. But in proportion, that might be quite large to their business. So we need to take that client-focused approach with this as well, and not just look internally to our processes and how we do it. We need to look at that interaction as we're working through and the client experience of how that goes about. From your perspective of what you see, Wim, what have you seen work really well with the client engagement and client experience part through the project, but also like at the end? How do we wrap up something well with a client, especially when it goes bad?
I'm trying to think because I've been kind of distant from projects with where I'm at in my MSPs. I got people managing the businesses, managing the projects. But I think that's actually right there is the answer. It's the who, not so much the what. It's getting the right person and them owning it, as you mentioned. And since we've done that, I haven't had to think about it. I'm not coming in to fix projects and what have you. Because really, I can't fix a project. Once it's gone badly, and it's really hard to fix. You can say what you want and promise what you want, but how do you fix that? Having the right people and then managing the flow so that nobody's overcommitted, overwhelmed, having too many projects. If they can focus on those few projects and tickets one at a time and move them forward, then they're set up to win. And defining what has to be done, make it, if we can get them, the engineers focused on all they're doing is projects, and it's just these 1 or 2 projects, and that's it. They're not also doing help desk and other things. It kind of comes together with less detail and less prescription, less micromanagement. And the communication, and we're finding if we do more of an agile approach of just the frequent communication, whether it could be a weekly, bi-weekly calls, and just doing it verbal, it actually saves a lot of time and better experience than long emails and updating individual tickets and stuff. People don't want to have tons of emails coming in their inboxes. It's like pigeons crapping on their inbox. Just don't want it. Like, let's get a quick call, go through it, talk about what we need to know. That's been helpful as well, and just way more efficient. So that's just one of the Agile principles, which is fresh in my mind because I did the PMI ACP, the Project Management Institute Agile Certified Practitioner exam recently, and that's one of the principles of Agile is face-to-face conversation over process and documentation and such.
People interaction. Like that's one of the things that we forget about in our technology businesses. It's all about the people, and we can have a quick 5-10 minute update call, which for most smaller projects, that's all it's going to take is we're on track, we're off track. This is what you need to do. This is what we need to do. Done. Then we can move on. It needs to be proactive. That's the problem with a lot of communication throughout projects. How we handle them by default is we're always leaving it up to the client to chase us. We're waiting too long. So anytime in a project, if a client's having to contact us and ask for an update, that should point to we're not getting it right. Like that should just be the theme. And that's where typically I think that's where we get up to this completion side, because we haven't been communicating a lot through the project, and we don't often keep an issues list going either. We can't proactively turn around and go, actually, we've only got X, Y, Z to be done, and we're going to move them to manage support. We're not going to do it under the project or whatever. We leave it lingering, and then because it's dragging on, when we do have a conversation with a client to follow up and check in, how are you feeling about the project? They'll pull out random issues that aren't related to the project, and we're not confident enough to just say, well, actually, that's not the project. We're complete, because we haven't proactively taken control and have the visibility. So utilizing the issues inside the PSAs to track what's going on and whether they're completed or not gives us that visibility and to make decisions at that point. And we should just get to that really simple place of have we ticked off all the parts of our objectives for the project? Have we migrated 365 and everyone has access to their old emails? Yes, done. But like, we're not talking about deep technical scope as everything being 100% complete and perfect. Ideally, we want to have that, but like, let's be pragmatic and realistic of, especially if they're an ongoing client, what's that 80% that's good enough for delivery that we're meeting with the scope? Like, if we scoped it properly, we should be able to just go line by line and just go, yep, that's done, that's done, that's done, that's done. And it's completed. And then it comes to that sign-off piece with the client. And when we say sign-off, doesn't necessarily mean a real formal, have a meeting, get them to sign a form to say it's all complete. We can start as simply as having that 5-10 minute phone call to say, all right, we've completed all of these. You agree, we agree. We might have no issues, we might have these lingering issues, but this is how we're going to deal with it. We all good here? And most of the time, the clients at that point will sign off. Yep, we're good, and we can bill. It's when we're not structured in that that's where it falls apart, and we feel like we need to get the client to sign, like physically sign something off. And that might be appropriate as you get more mature in the different types of projects you're doing. And if you're doing projects that aren't with your existing clients, that's usually where it comes in. If you're not continuing to support it, you're trying to get them to sign off that you've got no liability after the project's done, so you don't have to support it. Whereas when you've got the engaged clients, which that's the predominant way that we all do our work, is all our existing clients, it's a lot less of an issue because it's on us to deliver it to the scope, and it's on us to manage the scope of the agreements and what we're supporting. So it shouldn't cause us any issues that we need to have all this bureaucracy behind it to make it flow, which I find is what gets people stuck in thinking about this completion closure phase of, I need to, now I've got to schedule more meetings to go sit down with the client and get them to sign off. What does that sign off form need to look like? And get stuck with perfection again. We need to perfect it before we just put a process in and refine it from there once we're learning more lessons.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think it's important to distinguish on how the methodology on how the project is managed. And it could be a prescriptive upfront, here's your work breakdown structure, and here's what done means, and it's fixed price, and it's based on billing on these milestones, and the final, you don't get paid until the final one is sign off. That's kind of like you do a construction project that way. And then you've got the Agile project, which is more, you kind of do with Scrum, you would do like a 2-week sprint, that sort of thing. And you kind of, it's really adaptive as you go along. You do the planning, deliver it, get feedback onto the next batch of work. And there could be somewhere in between. So it kind of depends on the project. Are you doing a hybrid approach? So like some of our projects, they really are Agile, is we're doing so many hours every week, every month, and that project just stays open. And we're doing time, it's on retainer. So there is very little overhead on sign off and documentation or procedures and policies that way. So it's still there, it's verbal, and the client's happy, and we're connecting and having the calls and collaborating, but it's a different way of managing it. So just being aware of that, and it could differ from project to project or client to client that way. So just, agreeing up front on that and having that in place. But some of these things still got to be in place of the finance and understanding that up front and everyone clear on how that works.
It's the expectations at the start, isn't it? It's like what we've discussed in previous episodes around, we jump straight to project delivery and not setting the expectations up in the sales process, and that's what comes back to bite us. And I think it's a really good point around thinking about the different methodologies and what's appropriate for the type of project we're delivering to, because they are different. If you're developing something new, we're not just dumping it in like a building and construction project where it's just follow our nose, like our normal infrastructure project should be like that. Like if we're doing an agile infrastructure project, we're probably in a very dangerous position, but a lot of us actually end up managing our projects that way because we haven't done it very well. But if we're doing something new and we're developing new capabilities for us and the client, approaching it in a more agile way makes a whole lot more sense, because we don't need to plan it out all the way. We can do like what you're saying, the 2-week sprints. We're getting feedback immediately to say, what do we do? What we've done, is it appropriate? Do we need it to change for the next sprint and modify as we're going? It makes a huge difference, that understanding the different methodologies and what we're doing is one of the things we've mentioned through the series as well. It's like a lot of us don't have that grounding in a lot of these principles that are very well defined, that very intelligent people have created, and it's used in multiple different industries very successfully, that we can take a lot from that structured approach. I think too, as we're we're talking about closure. One of the important parts that we forget in the completion and closure phase, maybe we get the sign off from the clients. Very rarely do we get sign off internally from like handing off to service. Projects usually end up working independently. They do the project, they say it's done, and all of a sudden service has to support it, and there's no documentation complete. There's no idea what this new stuff has been put in, and guys might have done it over the weekend, and it's now onto service supporting it on Monday morning, and now what? And that's not good in a few ways, because firstly, it's going to drag the project guys straight back into supporting it, because the support team doesn't know what they're supporting. So now we've just put our next project at threat, because they're distracted by these issues that shouldn't be there. But it also impacts client delivery. Obviously, gives a bad perception to the client of how we operate, and it harms morale in the support team as well. Like, they don't trust project guys. They don't want to interact with them, because all they do is create them headaches. So having that flow and that ability for the service manager to turn around and say, no, actually, we're not supporting this, makes a huge difference in that accountability piece as it transitions through. And especially when you start getting a bit larger as well, when it's less of a small team that sort of they transition between projects and service. They don't all know what's going on. And it becomes very, very important there not to just throw stuff at support, because not only are you impacting projects profitability, you're affecting the service gross margins of the managed services.
Yep. 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 And then, yeah, I guess just administratively, things in the PSA mistakes I've seen is just people forgetting to change the status of the project from open to closed, which affects billing or the phases. So they think they've closed the project, but the phases are still open, so they're not getting billed, or the final report isn't getting sent to the client. There's a lot of snafus that are possible with that, because people are not trained on it. They don't know how the workflow or the policies are set up in the PSA. So it's powerful, but with the power and the complexity comes responsibility, and people aren't trained on it. So I've seen that where I've set up things, or operations managers set up things, but the team isn't aware, and it's just they think they're doing their job, but it's getting messed, and that slows down the project, or at least impacts the billing and reporting. So we've improved on that, is with the dashboards and checks and balances, is that it doesn't rely on one person. There's other people looking at it. We'll catch those things earlier and raise it up in our meetings and our huddles.
I agree. It's a really it goes back to the roles and responsibilities as well, of like who's responsible for things where they're at, and being able to set some checks and balances. So like I completely agree. I see a lot of the time of there's projects hanging around. The finance people don't know that it's actually billed. Project thinks it's done. They just need to change the status, and it'll appear to finance, and it'll all be dealt with. But for whatever reason, those little details get skipped over, because there's no accountability around it. There's no visibility either with gauges or process of what should clearly happen, and who can see that to double check it, like ConnectWise. What I find is a lot of people don't use sales orders as an example. They'll skip straight to converting it from the opportunity into a project. That's a black hole. Finance doesn't even know it exists until it shows up on the invoicing screen. So if we've got all those details, like you said, around, only bill on closure, if it's not closed, finance doesn't even know that it happened. No. But that's where having those sales orders in place is, we don't close the sales order till it's been fully invoiced. Well, sales has visibility then on projects. There's that accountability piece outside of having to look at the projects themselves, is we've got that list of items that have been sold, and then once they've done the final invoice, then it's closed, and We've got that security blanket. I would like to say that's not a big issue, but I've walked into clients where I've found them hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff that they haven't built because of these administrative and process issues. And it's not just small companies, it's big companies as well. And it's actually probably worse in the big companies if you don't get the stuff right because much bigger volume. So if we've got our methodology right, we've got our processes documented, we know what complete looks like, this all runs pretty smoothly and we get our cash, especially when we tie it back into how we're managing delivery beforehand and we're getting more efficient. All of a sudden, like what you were saying, got the right people in it, it'll just flow and it'll work very well. And it'll become a very profitable center of the business then, because it's cream on top. If we've got that good managed services recurring revenue coming in, all of this is just bonus on top of that. Plus, if we've got well set up environments with new staff that's set up with good practice, our managed services margins will go up because we're not having as many issues. So getting completion, funnily enough, is one of the really important parts to get right. And it's probably the least looked at component of all the projects. Something we take for granted.
Yep. Yeah, you got to start the project well. The middle part has to be done well, and you got to finish well. Yeah, and just the analogies in my mind right now are running. And with running, it's like you're doing a race. You got to pace yourself at the beginning because you got to leave something in the tank for later. Your middle mile is tough because nobody's there to cheer you, but you've got to do the middle mile on the marathon. But then when you finish, you want to finish strong and actually cross that line. But often, if you do what's called a negative split, you can pick up the pace at the end because you know that finish line is in sight. So let's push and get it done. Yeah. A lot of analogies there. Okay, so I guess in the last 5 minutes here, let's. The important part of a project is also retrospective. So in the lean language, it's called Kaizen, the Japanese word, just looking back, or what can we improve? What can we stop doing, start doing, keep doing? What have we learned? So what are the kind of questions you would ask in that sort of retrospective part of a project?
I think there's 5 questions I always ask in the retrospective. It's what was the client's perspective on how we engaged them and how they saw that we delivered it? How did we deliver against budget so that we can review profitability, but also then how well did we scope it overall with the labour side? How did we do against the scope itself? Was the scope appropriate? Are there more details that we can put in for next time? Did we overdo it, etc.? How can we? What did we do wrong? Was it scope? Was it we had the wrong resources? Did we use the wrong products, etc., etc.? And then what can we automate and what can we do differently so that we're more efficient the next time? And those are the 5 key things that I circle around time and time again. However, flavor that makes sense inside the companies and their culture, but those 5 things, if we're doing that, we'll capture so much information each time that we'll just get better and better and better.
Yep. No, excellent there. Yep. What else can we automate? What can we document? Can we turn any of this into templates? See what was waste. The customer didn't really. We did it, but it was no value to us and not to the customer either. What could we eliminate next time? Yeah.
What's important with this is that we actually write it down and hand out action items and actually do something about it. Because I find that a lot of people will have an ad hoc debrief about a project, even if it's like just walking, it's just a conversation in passing. Like we transfer information of what we could do better. We need to actually write it down so it's reinforced in our brains. And then from the action points, we need to actually assign owners and then drive that accountability if something happened. Like you said, a project template needs to be updated. Well, who's doing it? When does it need to be done by? There's a scope problem. All right, when's that being updated in our template library? We need to automate this. Who's got that task and is assigned to do it, and when does it need to be done by? If we don't do that, which most often we don't, nothing happens, because we get busy again. We're straight onto the next project, diving in, delivering that, and we just keep doing the same thing we've always done. So it's really important to actually execute on it and make time for it as well.
Yeah, that's key. If you're hearing the word, hey, we should do this or we shouldn't do that, it's actually it's just maintaining it, because you're just holding on to the current way of doing it. There's no action. It's like I should eat healthier, I should exercise more, but there's no action there. Just holding on to it. So yeah, that's key. So yeah, and in my team, my managers get together. I think it's they don't do it for every single project, but they'll batch it up. So every couple of weeks, they'll meet and review all the projects that have been completed, and then summarize a note. So I see that, so I can see how they're improving, the actions taken, the lessons learned. They're like, hey, it was all good, it was profitable on budget, or this one went over, and here's why. So that's been helpful as well to keep a pulse on it. So you could combine a couple of projects. You spend an hour and go through 3 or 4 projects at the same time. It just depends on the nature of the project and the team.
We just need to be deliberate and proactive with it. Like everything that we've spoken about in this episode today, have our process, be deliberate about it, and have the clear action points, and all these problems go away. It is that simple a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Projects aren't rocket science. We just turn it into it because we are too loose.
Yeah. But I'm seeing a lot more. So like with the top left user group that we're doing every month, I just hear from these project managers, and some of them are not equipped to win at all. Like they're promoted from being the tech, and they're a bit more extroverted and showing interest. So they get promoted into a project coordinator or project manager role, but they've got no training on it. There's no process. PSA isn't set up. They've got no role model, no support, no coaching. And so they're kind of grabbing at straws to, hey, well, there must be a better way. The tool's here. But they're left like their PSA's got bad data from the predecessor who didn't know much more. So I see this, and it's like, yeah.
And I think, this has been a great session, and that's a fantastic next topic for us to talk about, the resourcing and identifying the sort of people that are really suited to being successful at this, and how do we support them properly. So it's been an awesome conversation. I hope others get something out of this and actually start completing projects and getting the build faster. That's the aim. Get the money in. Money is important.
Yeah, that's a bit where we actually bill everything up front, or either it's prepaid like fixed price project, or it's a prepaid retainer. So that money part hasn't impacted us too much, but the lingering has in the past, where it's sitting around too long. But once I got the right people in place, then it's fine. So it's but I know, for many companies they're billing in arrears, so you got to watch that. So good stuff. So next time we'll talk about team structure and roles and training, and getting the right person in the right seat and setting them up to win.
I'll look forward to it.
Yeah. And all right. So with that, I'll wrap it up and see you next time.
See everyone next time. Thanks, Win.